Hey, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Jonathan Hunter, who's a Bronze Star winning EOD commander turned defense tech CEO. He founded Department 13, took it public on the ASX, and launched MLP Technologies to deliver battlefield proven counter drone systems worldwide. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much for having me, Danny. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, curious to learn more about you. What's your background and how did you become the CEO?
Well, it started in a little town called Vacaville, California. And then from there, I went to Sacramento State. I was kind of lost for a little bit. And my sister said, "Hey, I think you would do really good in the U.S. Army." And I'm like, "Hey, Carrie," who's my sister. And I said, "I don't know. I don't know how good I would do." And she goes, "No, no, trust me, you'll do well." And then I went to ROTC camp, and I was number 2 out of 1,100 cadets. And I thought maybe this is a thing for me. And so I went into the U.S. Army, got commissioned. I learned how to do artillery, call for fire support officer, deployed to Bosnia. And from there, I was branch detailed into the Ordnance Corps, and there was either maintenance, ammo supply, or you defuse bombs. And I chose to defuse bombs and become an EOD officer, a company commander, and took the 756 to Afghanistan in 2002. And then after that, I got out, went to work for the National Institute of Justice, running research and development programs for U.S. State and local bomb squads. Supported a lot of activities, organizations, all to do with counter threat, counter IED, because at that time Iraq was just kicking off and IEDs were the thing. Then I went to work for the number one manufacturer of bomb suits. And in that time, we were doing the electronic warfare platform called the Chameleon System, in which we deployed 10,000 systems to the U.S. Marine Corps with General Dynamics. I learned a lot about business. And then from there, we took off with Department 13 and started looking at how to surgically identify radios and how to affect those radios at the protocol level. It's a technique called protocol manipulation. And we built a platform called Mesmer, took it public, raised like $33 million in Australian to build out the company, build out the product, transitioned out of that after my deployment with the United Nations in Mali, Africa in 2022. And I started MLP Technologies with the idea of, I don't want to sell boxes. I want to build out solutions with customers and clients. And that's what I do now. So pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, you started a company that you took public, and I mean, this is a great achievement. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Why Australia specifically, and how you managed to grow this company and get it so far?
So we were struggling along, and there's two problems that happen in the current defense sector, especially for young startups. You're attracted to solving a defense problem, not building out a product, right? So you end up getting a lot of research and development grants, and you get stuck in this engineering services company because you don't have enough capital to build out a product in which the defense sector is going to purchase or procure. So you can do many, many years like we did. We were stuck in that cycle for about 4 or 5 years where we were doing between $3 to $600,000 a year, which is not enough to grow a company or actually grow a product. So what we found ourselves is undercapitalized to be a product company, and we were stuck in that engineering services. So basically begging for the next contract to build out something. And that doesn't allow you to grow a company, right? So we look for different ways. I have a unique opportunity of living in the Washington, D.C. area for 21 years. And I was invited to a friend's rooftop event that oversees the Capitol. I met a crazy Australian. That crazy Australian saw the video of us taking down a drone with a $35 Wi-Fi card and a laptop. And he says, "Cracky mate, I can take you to Australia and I can raise a bunch of capital." And after struggling for 4 or 5 years in the engineering services where you're not making a lot of money, you're not being able to pay the bills, this was an attractive offer. Right. And during that time, they have a lot of the Australian market basically do a lot of mining, and they basically do their investments through the ASX to develop the capital required to do all the mining around the world. Australia is one of the leaders in mining, of all the minerals and elements that we need. And so we basically went on what's called a backdoor listing, right? And we weren't the only company. Drone Shield was another company at the time that started off with some DARPA engineers. They did the exact same thing as us almost the exact same time. They chose the acoustic route. We chose the protocol manipulation of the digital radio route to do the identification, tracking, and mitigation of the drones. And this was a small window where we were actually able to do what's called the backdoor listing. We came underneath a defunct mining company, changed the listing from K&E at the time to the and then that's where Department 13 became an international trading company, right? Public company. I honestly, now having experienced that, I would not recommend it for companies that do not have revenue. And that's where you get in that cycle where you raise capital to build a product, but you have to have every quarter positive reports to maintain and sustain that level of interest in the public markets, right? As a nascent company in a nascent market, it's very problematic to capitalize a company that way. I would have, now knowing this, stay in the private sector and only use the public markets for an exit strategy, right? And I would recommend that to anyone who's in the startup phase. It sounds sexy, it sounds fun. It's not. It's a lot of work to do that, right? I learned a lot, and I would only go public if I was looking to exit.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So let's say I want to start a defense tech startup and I don't have a lot of capital, I don't have a lot of connections in DC or wherever. How would you suggest me to start it, what to do, what to focus on, and how to succeed?
So one is understand what problem you're truly trying to solve, right? And understanding the threat comes with that. And a lot of engineers are very smart. They just don't understand what the threat really is, right? So they're building out this really cool system. And by the time they're done building it out, the threat is either migrated to something new, and the system they built out was for an old threat, or they didn't think about the operational use cases, or what we call the TRDs and the ORDs, the technical requirements and the operational requirements. You got to understand both. And in doing that, you understand what the threat really is. And so a lot of people miss that. I would also say this: when you do understand what the threat is, and if you don't have a lot of capital, you got to work 16-hour days, 7 days a week. You got to be able to make mistakes that you can walk away from, right? You can't make mistakes that you can't walk away from. So think about that too, is when you make decisions, key hires, bringing people on, anytime you spend money, money is precious when you're in that young startup phase. So don't waste it on things you don't need. Like, nobody uses business cards anymore. Don't spend $250 on business cards when you're a young startup. Wait till you're mature and you got extra money in the thing. Don't worry about your flair. Don't worry about office. Go remote as much as you can, right? Only buy one suit. You don't need 12 suits, right? You don't need fancy watches. You're going to starve, right? But if you got a really good solution, right, you will eventually find your path. I would also say this: find somebody who understands the threat that's been downrange, right? And what we did was I associate with really smart engineers, right? And I'm always constantly saying to them, that's not going to work because that button's too small, or nobody can read a spectrograph when you're getting shot at, right? And these are the type of things that you need to have that good team around you, right? That understands not only one part of the problem set, but the entire, you have each person that comes together that basically feels out the entire apparatus of what's really required from not only running the company, understanding the technology, understanding the threat, but having the sales, the relationship that are really needed in the defense sector.
So, from what I understand, the only client a defense startup, defense company has is the government. Is that correct?
That's partly where you're going to struggle, and what's going to happen is you're going to get somebody to give you $300,000, and that $300,000 is going to last you 12 months, 18 months. But that's not going to be enough to build out a product. It's going to be able to say, well, we got a contract and we're working, right? And most of the time, that margin is not even going to be enough to pay the bills, right? So you're still going to be in that struggle mode. And the other thing too is you got to learn how to balance what an FTE should be or could be, and what maybe you contract out certain work, right? And there's a lot of that, right? Understanding well, I don't need to bring in a full-time DSP engineer. Maybe I just contract that part out, and it may pay more early on, but I don't have the burden of like telling him 9 months from now he's fired because I don't have the money to pay for him. Right. So there's a lot of that business aspect that you need to think about too when you start doing this. And the other piece of this, you're going to eventually have to decide what you really want to be. There's a lot of people that will do 10 years, 20 years of engineering services. Maybe they build it out to like a $7, $8 million a year, but they never actually build products, right? And because if you need to build a product, you got to take capital. There's no way you're going to be able to build out products without taking capital. I'd say 95% of the time, unless you're really lucky, because it takes a different mindset, right? There's an engineering phase to this, and there's a production phase where you actually take this engineering thing, and now you get some other guy with a different way of thinking, saying, well, now I need to produce a product that's scalable, supportable, trainable, and what the client wants. And it could be two different things by the time the product guy is done with it. And it's a different way of thinking if you're going to go into the production of making a product, and capital is almost always required for that.
But to even get the contract or understand what the defense sector needs, you probably need to first get into the circles of, of people either close to the government or within the government. You have to have some kind of a network to access that, or you can still start with the engineering phase and then try to find the fit between what's needed and what you offer.
Yeah, and like so you see a lot of like there's agencies like Softworks or AppWorks or even like the Army of Application Lab, and they have these problem sets that they're looking for. Some people even crowdsource their solutions, and what they'll do is they'll offer prizes and they'll offer this stuff, and that's great, right? Sometimes it's really good, especially if the program manager you're working with has access to other things that they can take this program and pass it over to these other agencies. And usually they're like the PEO offices, specifically in the Army, right? And now a lot of people are doing the JCOs and the AppFits to get the bigger contracts when you're going to go into that product phase. But you do have to understand this. And I do think this is where, if you're an engineer listening to this, you need to find somebody who understands that side of it and bring them into your circle, right? And if you're somebody that understands this, what I'm talking about now, then you need to find some really smart engineers that want to work with you, right? And I've been very fortunate. I have some of the best and the brightest engineers that I've been able to bring on from the different organizations I've worked throughout the 27 years, right? And these relationships matter, and understanding that there's friendships, relationships, and monetization of both, right? We want each other's to be successful. I've had plenty of conversation with people like, John, I'm really rooting for you. I'm really rooting for you. And like 10 years down the line, someone will call me, hey, John, you still doing this? And I'm like, yeah, I'm still working out here. I'm struggling. He goes, no, call this person. You won't struggle anymore. And guess what happens, right? Those relationships matter, right? And I'm a big fan of all the relationships I've made throughout my both my military career and after my military career, and the rant.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Appreciate it. So just like any other business or a startup, market is very important. And within the defense sector, market is dependent on what's happening in the world, whether there is a war, whether it's peacetime relatively. For example, for 3 years, the war in Ukraine is going, and they need some weapons from the US. So this market might be unpredictable, and I'm curious to learn how much like volatile this market is, and how much it's dependent on things outside of your control, and how you mitigate that.
So that is a great question. And it's really interesting because as I entered the U.S. Army, we were a state on state acting, training, fight as we train, fight, train as we fight. So we're looking big tanks. We got integrated tanks and Bradleys fighting together, combined arms operations, air, land, and sea. And we're doing all this stuff. And then 9/11 happens, and the entire ethos of how we fought changed to asymmetric warfare, right? GWAT. So for 20 years, EOD, nobody knew what EOD was until 9/11. And then the moment 9/11 happens, everyone's like, I need EOD. I need EOD. Why are you always late, EOD? I'm like, hey, look, we're doing our best. We're busy. right? But the point is, coming into that, when you're in this defense sector, the threats are changing so fast, right? And I remember we used to study like what each BMP looks like, what T-55, T-72. Each we would study these cards, and then you started studying like what kind of cell phones are being made commercially? What are the capabilities of those cell phones? Because those can now be trigger devices. That, what is a spider device, right? What crystal oscillators being used? And it's all commercial electronics, right? And the threat changed because we used to worry about the state actors developing systems. Now we're working about the commercial industry developing capabilities that are going to be used against us, right? And I think even like bringing this to the Ukraine, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, no one knew what an FPV drone was. Now everyone knows what an FPV drone is, right? FPV is the number one threat on the battlefield right now. And even within that own threat, within 3 years, it's migrated from an RF environment. Everyone brings in the jammers, everyone brings in the GPS interference, and they flip it on. And then like, well, let's go to fiber optic. So even within the own subsection of the threat, right, you go from an RF threat to a fiber threat, right? Well, that changes your capabilities and how you can detect, track, locate, and mitigate the drone. Because before you used to detect the RF signal, jam the RF signal, right? Now you can't do that anymore, right? So within that 3 years, and by the time you build out a product for the threat that began the war, you deliver that product, it's no longer valid. So it is very difficult. And I think people need to start thinking, even within the DoD procurement systems, on how we can do this faster, smarter. Because I think if anything that Ukraine has showed us is that the threat migration is faster than the development and productization of the capabilities to counter the threats, right?
Yeah, yeah. And do you have a view of the future of warfare, maybe how AI comes into play, or your mindset is more about adapting to whatever comes next?
I think AI is going to come to play significantly on the battlefield. I think it's already begun. And there's a difference because we talk about AI very loosely. A lot of the AI we see now, even within the systems that are being deployed, and they advertise and market AI, they're more of a machine learning development of the model. Good data has to be generated, and then you build up the model set, and then you deliver it downrange. And that works for so long before you have to develop a new model. That's machine learning, basically, right? I think that you're going to see advancements in AI like you've never seen. Like I think we've already seen that. I'm not saying anything like out of the box. Just in the last 3 years, like how we interact from businesses, how we interact from a commercial and even in the defense sector, AI has now infused itself into this whole structure, both in the business operations, but also in the battlefield operations, right? And it's going to just keep increasing in capabilities as we go to the generative AI and the next phase of AI, probably roughly around 8 to 10 years away from now. So it will be interesting. Everyone says right now that AI will never be the kill switch. It will never be the deciding factor. We will always have a human in the loop. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think eventually we will have to succumb to the fact that we're not fast enough and AI is. And I think in 8 to 9, 10 years from now, you're going to see AI uh, instituted at the kill chain, the pressing the button. It will no longer be the human in the loop. We say it's not, but I just don't know how we can get around um, making those decisions fast enough with the threats that are going to be coming our way in the future.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Thinking about the Cold War and like the 60s, the 70s, when there was this huge competition between the US and the Soviet Union, there were a lot of innovations made during that time, in the military and also in the civilian sector with going to the moon and stuff. And it seems like now we're entering this new global cold conflict with China and other adversaries. Would you say that this kind of environment is positive for innovation in the tech and defense sectors?
100%, yeah, because Someone once told me the U.S. always needs a threat. They always needed an adversary. And if you look throughout our decades, whether it was the Soviet Union, the Vietnam, Soviet Union, communism, we always promoted this idea that U.S. always had a threat that we had to fight against, right? The moment you don't have a threat to fight against is the moment you stop spending money on it, right? And I think that even in this new deglobalization period that we look like we're experiencing, it feels like it's going to happen where we're going to have regional alliances around the world, that you're going to still have the freedom of seas is going to be a big thing that's going to be at play. China will have their selected allies. We will have our allies. But I do think this one thing, I think that the conflicts will stay small. I don't think they will go like world. I don't think China really wants to engage the US or the US's allies, because it's not just the US. We will have a big team if that ever happens. And I think that there's too much money at stake, right? There's too much business, there's too much exchange of commerce that really would have a negative impact if we went to a global conflict. And I think if we ever got to that point, unfortunately, the aftermath, it would take many decades to heal from it. And I think it would set not only certain countries back, but it would set the world back. And I don't think anyone really wants to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, this will not happen. And the final question before we end: what advice would you give yourself 20 years ago?
Marry wise, have lots of kids, don't take the world too serious, and live the great American novel. That's the advice I would give myself, because you and I, we will last however long we last for, and what we do, it matters to us but no one else. And laugh more than you cry, right? And love. That's what I would tell myself 20 years ago.
Nice. Well, thank you for coming to the show today, sir, for sharing your advice. A lot of very important lessons learned, and yeah, super glad to have this conversation today.
Nice to meet you, Danny, and you have a great day, okay?
Absolutely.